Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. In our previous episode, we did a serious deep dive into the Los Angeles rock music scene of the 1980s, focusing on the decade's first half. This scene was, during this time, divided into two halves. On one side, you had the burgeoning glam/hair metal bands who were quickly crossing over into the rock mainstream via radio and MTV. The flamboyance, decadence, outrageousness, and debauched lifestyles of bands like Motley Crüe, Rat, and Quiet Riot signaled a new era for mainstream rock. On the other side, the city and its surrounding areas produced a fertile and more artistically minded underground, indie alternative scene that, during this time, coalesced around hardcore punk. However, thanks to record labels like the legendary SST and bands such as Black Flag and the Minutemen, there was a lot more innovation, exploration, and eclecticism to this part of the scene than met the eye. Well, now we've reached the second part of this series, which covers the second half of the 1980s, roughly the period between 1986 and 1990. Glam/hair metal by now has saturated the rock market on both radio and MTV. Motley Crüe, the city's premier band of this style, were on their way to graduating to arena rock status with a series of best-selling albums. Hot on their heels, though, came a flood of bands, either from LA or from other parts of the country that flocked to LA to make it big, that vied for the hair metal sweepstakes. This episode will produce a lightning round of key singles by the likes of Cinderella, White Lion, Winger, Skid Row, Great White, Warrant, and Slaughter. And, of course, no story of LA rock in the 1980s is complete without the story of the heaviest, nastiest, gnarliest, most controversial, and eventually by far the biggest band that the scene ever produced, Guns N' Roses. And even when hardcore punk receded into memory and Black Flag and the Minutemen broke up, the city's underground indie alternative scene still thrived, even more so than before, thanks to the visionary, innovative, and, as the 1990s would come to show, massively influential sounds of two bands in particular, the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Jane's Addiction. Join us as we conclude our mini-series on the great and timeless rock music of Los Angeles in the 1980s. And welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
Yeah, Arturo, it's not very often that we get to cover some of the best of the rock canon and some of the worst of the rock canon in the exact same episode. But that's what we're doing in this covering the waterfront of late 80s LA, aren't we?
Yeah, the best in quotation marks.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, for some of it is best in big, bright, capital neon letters, and some of it is in quotes and very minuscule. Basically, you need a magnifying glass to see the print on that. And I'm sure there might be a couple of listeners. I mean, I might sneak in the name of one of these bands into our episode description just so we can get those two people out there that actually like Slaughter. You know,
yeah. Up all night, sleep all day, fly to the angel. Yeah. Oh boy.
Okay, well, okay, so folks, that just gives you a little sneak preview of stuff that's coming up here later in the episode. But before we get going, we're going to take that trip that we always do at the beginning of these episodes. We are ripping open the space-time continuum, going to the other side, and now entering the parallel universe. Yes, folks, the parallel universe where rock and roll was still the big thing, man, where it never went the way of jazz, it never became niche, and it still moves units, and there's still such a thing as physical media, and there's still such a thing as big hair and tight jeans and V-neck guitars and just all kinds of awesome stuff that still exists over in the parallel universe. That's a fancy conceptual way of saying this is the segment of our show where we cover new and newish artists that we think that you would dig if you check them out, and I think are worthy of praise, or that are definitely noteworthy, but also good. You know, we've fallen into the trap before, at least I have, of pointing out noteworthy and then finding out, well, maybe it's not actually all that great. But I've cured myself of that, and so we have some good music that we want to share with you. And so, Arturo, you're up first. Who are you covering on this episode's version of the Parallel Universe?
Yeah, hailing from Dublin, Ireland, the Murder Capital released their third album this year, titled not their third album of this year, just the third album overall. And the name of the album is called Blindness. The album itself is pretty mediocre, but the third single from that record, titled The Fall, is a cracker of a song. The quintet have been labeled as post-punk by the British music press, but I disagree with that tag. When I hear this song, as well as the other two standout tracks from the album, Words Lost Meaning and Swallow, I hear a distinct grunge flavor, owing more to the heavier side of 1990s alternative rock. Imagine 1990s Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds if they got jacked up by peak period Screaming Trees. Some gnarly, noisy guitar work by Cathal Roper and Damien Tuitt, some earnest, angry emoting from singer James McGovern, and an overall sense of drama and tension guide this track to rock grandiosity. They're a pretty decent band capable of some great moments. Chris?
Yeah, they are definitely capable of some great moments. And in addition to The Fall, the formal single release of The Fall has two other really good songs from Blindness on it. Words Lost Meaning, which you mentioned, and Can't Pretend to Know, which is another very good song from that record. Now, the record itself, Blindness, falls a little bit short because there's a fine line between noise rock and just noise.
Yeah,
and there's a little too much noise and a little too many uninviting melodies to really make it more than 3 stars. But these 3 songs and a couple of others make them worthwhile. As far as bands, as far as comparison points, I do hear some Joy Division. I think The Fall would make Joy Division proud as far as its angularity and its spookiness. Definitely sort of falls into that realm. But another band I hear, especially on Words Lost Meaning, is Black Rebel Motorcycle Club.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I make that connection in terms of the crunchiness and the melodicism mixed together. We dedicated an episode last year on Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. So go check that out in our catalog, folks. Really great band. One of the most underappreciated, probably we think the most underrated band of the entire 2000s. So I hear that, but it's kind of post-punk. It's kind of grunge. It's kind of 90s alt. And it's kind of, I don't know, I guess you would call it just bone crunching metal ish kind of stuff.
I just call it heavy alternative rock. That's what I would call it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Maybe a little bit of PJ Harvey too, and which makes sense because the Ireland tradition of post punk goes through PJ Harvey,
even though she's English.
Okay, even though she's English. Okay, thank you for the correction. For some reason, you know why? Because she worked with the producer Flood, who is Irish.
Right.
So
right.
that's why I always confuse that. So thank you, fact checking, cuz. So anyway, yeah, definitely check out the Murder Capital. They're definitely worth investment. As is the band that I'm going to cover next here on the Parallel Universe, and who I'm focusing on. I've had a good year for finding compelling yet flawed indie rock records. Well, here's another one to add to the pile. Beach Bunny's Tunnel Vision. These days, it takes work ethic, grit and grind, and let's face it, a whole lot of dumb luck for an indie rock act to get its music heard broadly. Most of the time these days, that dumb luck is tied to the ability for a song to go viral on social media, especially on TikTok. Chicago power pop band Beach Bunny has been fortunate enough for this to happen to them twice in their career so far. Once in 2019 with the punk romper Prom Queen, and again in 2021 with the terrific, energetic hard rock nugget Cloud 9, which actually features Tegan and Sarah, interestingly enough. Prom Queen, amazingly enough, has 700 million plays plus on Spotify, which is pretty remarkable for a band that puts out its own music these days. These successes, they did put Beach Bunny on the map, and while major label Good Vibrations didn't happen for the band, these TikTok explosions have helped keep the band on the map. And they've kept going. Now on their third full-length album, the recently released Tunnel Vision. The band is mainly the creative outlet for frontwoman Lily Trifilio, a sensitive young woman unafraid to jot her mental torture onto paper and then to press play on recording. Tunnel Vision is definitely more subdued than Cloud 9, but not really by much. It's a consistent little puncher of a record blasting through 10 Trifilio confessionals over the course of nearly 30 minutes. The hooks here are strong, as are the orthodox three-piece power pop arrangements. Trifilio was obviously enduring something of an early adulthood crisis when she wrote these songs, and as the trials and travails of her brain and the way she interacts with a confusing, increasingly aggravating world are on full display. The meat of this record can be found in its middle section, songs 4 through 7. First up, on Tunnel Vision's title track, Tunnel Vision, Trifilio expresses exasperation at her poor decision-making in her late 20s. She does so against a musical backdrop that evokes late 80s college rock. Next, she freaks out about reaching her late 20s on the ultramelodic Clueless, engaging in tortured nostalgia over how good she had it in her early 20s, even if maybe it really wasn't all that great. I relate to and dig this song, as I kind of did the same thing when I was 29, spending many a sleepless night pining for the days when I was 23 and enjoying living in Astoria with Arturo, even as my job beat the crap out of me. Clueless is followed by Pixie Cut, a stomping punk pop tune on which Trifilio laments her inability to stop overthinking, to the point she wishes she could give her brain a pixie cut to help it knock it off. Pretty clever. Again, a relatable tune for me, also a champion overthinker. On the heels of Pixie Cut comes the album's first single, Vertigo, another ode to Trifilio's broken brain. I thought when I was older I would be on top, she sings at one point. I thought the jealousy would drop, but it never stops. I've got a strange obsession of mixing love and loss, but at what cost? I'm protecting myself from emotional healing, end quote. A quirky pounding rhythm drives this song, supplying an inertia to match that lyric tremendously. Tunnel Vision, the album, grows a tad samey by its end, preventing it from being a 4-star album. But as is, it's nevertheless an engaging study of Gen Z female psychology and evident need for super-duper psychiatry. I recommend it as a unique listen for a 49-year-old male like me, and as an on its own strong power pop effort. Solid 3.5 stars here. Arturo?
Yeah, this is not bad. This is not bad. I give it 3 stars. To me, this sounds like this band or this person who's the leader of the band. She really likes her 1990s alternative rock.
Yeah,
she does. When I hear this, I hear basically the female side of 90s alt rock. I hear Belly, Tanya Donnelly's Belly. I hear quite a bit of later period Throwing Muses, a band that Tanya Donnelly was a part of. So that part of 90s alt rock mixed with a healthy dose of pop punk.
Yeah.
What I hear, slight hints of even Blink-182 in some tracks even.
Yeah, and I also hear a little bit of Rilo Kiley.
Sure. That as well. My one complaint about this band is that a few too many songs with the lyrics about I don't trust my mind, I don't trust my feelings, I don't trust myself, I don't know what's going on in my life, blah blah blah. I mean, come on, that sounds like something a teenager would write. I mean, this woman is now in her mid to late 20s. Give me a break. Grow up a little bit. You know, But
Yeah,
that being said, I really like the last song, "Cycles." It's the one track where like the whiny mopey, the whiny mopey psychological trauma, not trauma, but psychodrama lyrics work their way into a really melodic song with a lot of space that gives the song air and room to breathe. That's why I'm a big fan of that song, "Cycles," and I like the melodic
yeah,
motif
Cycles is good.
with a
Yeah.
melodic motif in the keyboard is really good. It's like I said, it's a song that has the most breathing room. I think they pack a little too much, a few too many chord changes and a few too many melodic twists into one 2.5 minute song. I think Big Pink Bubble is really catchy. I like that one. I think Tunnel Vision, the title track, I could see why it was chosen as the single. And
Mhm.
yeah, I think those are a couple of the best tracks on the album. I wish she would have, I wish her band would help her like give more space to her songs. Her songs need more space, I
Yeah.
think, and
I think that's a fair criticism.
and I think refine her lyrics a little bit more to not
Yeah, I
just,
mean,
just
in her defense, you got to remember she's a Gen Z representative, and Gen Z is known for its arrested development and self focus, and
yeah,
so
but you know what?
a
But
lot, a
when
lot, a
you're
lot of that psychodrama that's happening at 28. Yeah, it happened for us when we were 18, 19, into our early 20s, and it happened for me when I was 28. Obviously, I'm kind of a late bloomer in life,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you got to be fair. I mean, she's kind of a flag waver for Gen Z women.
Mm.
And a lot of that stuff about the relationship with the brain has become kind of
Relationship with the
topic du
brain.
jour
Yeah,
these days.
there's a way to do this. Take more drugs. How about that? Your relationship with your brain will get a lot better.
But then again, maybe she needs to take fewer drugs. Maybe she's smoking too much pot and she's paranoid.
I think she's smoking. I think she's not smoking enough pot, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah. So there you go, Miss Traffelio. Smoke more pot, according to yours truly, Curmudgeons, please. Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
So, as I mentioned in our parameter setter, from 1986 to 90, glam/hair metal really got saturated all over rock radio and MTV. It was the dominant form of rock music for that era, for this time, which was quite a long time. And for us curmudgeons who were young boys around this time, it felt everywhere. It felt just
Yeah,
everywhere. You
fucking
couldn't
everywhere.
escape it. It was ubiquitous. And
Yeah.
one of the before we go into this really cool cool lightning round of bands and singles, it's fascinating how by this point, by this time, a lot of these glam and hair metal bands really weren't from LA. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, that's pretty much true. By 1986, the Sunset Strip-based glam metal scene of Los Angeles had become a global commodity after
Yeah.
steadily building cult coverage by the rock press and achieving a, quote, cesspool of depravity vibe, to quote Motley Crue singer Vince Neil. The breakout success of first Quiet Riot in 1983 and then Motley Crue from late 1983 through 85 helped the whole world seemingly fall in love with the spandex hairspray and glammy makeup of those scenester bands. And every metal band in the U.S. seemingly wanted a piece of the action. A steady influx of bands flocked to L.A. hoping for their breakout. Everyone wanted to be discovered, man. And MTV did nothing to dissuade those guys from coming, as the big-haired fellas in V-neck guitars could be seen practically every hour of the day on that channel. That channel, MTV, even started a midnight on Saturdays program called Headbangers Ball to mark the occasion of glam metal going mainstream. LA was codified on the boob tube for sure. In LA itself, there was a race to be the next pretty boy lead singer or the next freaky looking guitar god. The Roxy and the Troubadour especially became the clubs to see and be seen on the strip. It must have been strange for the native Angelinos to find themselves competing for billing space with dudes from places like Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, and central New Jersey. But such was the vibe of the times. When Motley Crue graduated from the clubs and into arenas, there came along Poison, Warren, and many other bands to fill the void, including Guns N' Roses, actually. So that's one good side effect. The originals who Crue left behind must have shaken their head in disbelief at how played out the scene was in danger of becoming. Yet the labels and talent scouts remained on the scene, and even as late as 1990, names like Slaughter were continuing to break out. It took the ascendancy of grunge in 1991 to truly kill the scene as everyone knew it. Oh well. Arturo, any thoughts about the LA glam metal scene during this period?
I will have a lot to say once this lightning round is over. And if you notice, the songs are in chronological order from mid 80s until 1990, right
Yeah.
before the grunge alternative rock boom just killed everything.
Yep.
And there's a lot to say about that. But I want to hear what you have to say about all these songs. Like, God,
Yeah.
this is bringing back memories when I was 12 and 13 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Listening to my little radio and listening to
not
my little
necessarily
radio
good
in my
ones.
not
Yeah.
all good ones, right? But
Yeah.
listening to my little radio in my bedroom. Oh my God, the
Yeah,
memories.
and me watching MTV nonstop. I mean, I used to come home from school and watch MTV like for 4 hours. So I was a big MTV head during this period. So this brings back good and bad memories for me. So yeah, we're going to do a little bit of a lightning round to cover some of the singles from some of the second-rate bands that and some of the lesser bands. We'll eventually focus on three bands in particular: Poison, Motley Crue, and Guns N' Roses. Here when we get through this, but let's do this lightning round of these singles and what we need to know. We're going to start with Cinderella and Nobody's Fool and Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone. Nobody's Fool. Who knew glam rock could so closely resemble Germany's art metal crooners, the Scorpions?
Yeah.
But such was the case with Philadelphia import Cinderella's breakout hit Nobody's Fool. A pop song at heart, the band lays down glammy guitar solos and sexy time lead lines that produce more than a dollop of mystery. Band leader Tom Kiefer was perhaps the star-screamiest singer of this whole bunch of glam metal bands, but here
For
he
people
displays...
don't know, Starscream was a robot warrior from the Transformers.
Yeah.
The evil Decepticon.
who had a... Yeah, so...
He does sound like Starscream.
He was very star-screamy. And but here he displays more of an emotional range. Nobody's Fool was the lead single off Cinderella's debut album, Night Songs. The song reached number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100, helping to propel Night Songs to number 3 on the Billboard 200 albums chart by February of 1987. The band also opened for Bon Jovi on a world tour that year, 1987. Well, what's a band to do when a power ballad thrusts it into the mainstream consciousness? Well, they produce another hit power ballad, by gum.
That's right.
And this time, the band dispensed with the drama guitars and hit the piano keys, with Kiefer gently warbling out the saccharine sentiments of Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone. This is a quintessential late 80s glam metal ballad. The drums echo marvelously while the multi-track vocals swell to proud heights. Kiefer goes truly full-blown Starscream here, trading articulation for screamy graveliness. Lighters were lit all over the nation, man. Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone performed even better than Nobody's Fool on the singles chart, reaching number 12 this go-around. Cinderella's relevance waned in subsequent years, and vocal problems experienced by Kiefer just as grunge was overtaking hair metal as the hard rock du jour sealed the doors on the band's tomb by 1994. But Cinderella will forevermore live on as a true two-hit wonder. You want to comment here, Arturo, or are you going to wait until the end?
Wait till the end.
Okay, we're waiting to the end. We're going to keep going then. Next band up, unfortunately, White Lion with Wait and When the Children Cry. Here's another modest glam metal success story with members hailing from Denmark and New York. White Lion served up a particularly poppy, female fan-friendly brand of hard rock. The hooks were as big as band leader Mike Tramp's hair. Yes, the guy's name was Mike Tramp. and the production was so slick the tape practically dripped oil. But hey, if mainstream heartstrings were their aim to pull, the formulae of pop metal works well, worked. The band's 1987 breakthrough album Pride produced two hit singles, the peppy breezy Wait and the spectacularly corny and delectably awful When the Children Cry. Wait builds itself on a tenderly rendered lead line, and it serves up an earnestly belted sing-songy chorus. It's the kind of thing you'd expect to hear a cereal maker use to promote its newest kitty concoction. The commerciality drips here. The song's path to chart success however, was a long one, born from constant touring by the band and some lucky exposure that came the song's way via MTV Airplay. After a June 1987 release, Wait finally reached the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 in May 1988. The song peaked at number 8. Credit this band's fortitude in sticking things out and taking the long road to glory. Having hit the MTV big time, White Lion's next path to hit-making glory was much shorter and much, much more unfortunate. When the Children Cry has the future of the world and the well-being of all the little kids everywhere affixed to its heart. It's the kind of thing you expect from Michael Jackson, not a metal band, but even Michael sucked when he traveled this route. And so it is with White Lion and Mike Tramp. Check out this lyric. Little child, dry your crying eyes. How can I explain the fear you feel inside? 'Cause you were born into this evil world where man is killing man and no one knows just why. What have we become? Just look at what we have done. All that we have destroyed, you must build again. When the children cry, let them know we tried. 'Cause when the children sing, then the new world begins.
What songs are the children going to sing?
Yeah. But hey, the record buyers in 1988 dug this kind of thing. After all, this was only 3 years removed from the sentimental powder kegs of We Are the World and the bicontinental Live Aid shows of July 1985. So this testosterone-free zone of hopefully cloying emotiveness wound up reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song lives on in streaming times. It's been played more than 70 million times to date on Spotify. I hope that's more for laughs and nostalgia than for inspiration. I really, really hope so. White Lion thankfully went away pretty quickly after 1988. They rode the fad while it was white hot, though, and did make a mark for better or for worse. Next band up, Winger, with Headed for a Heartbreak and 17. Let's face it, glam metal's sexual energy and fashionability was part of its appeal. Any good debauchery should be accompanied by a lot of fucking and songs with fucking squarely on their mind. And once in a while, for female listeners, the soothing vocal tones of a bona fide fuckboy to help bolster the proceedings. That probably explains entirely the success of the band Winger and its handsome boy frontman Kip Winger. This one-time New York band hit the charts somewhat late in the glam metal rush of the late 1980s, getting there in 1989 twice, first with the oh-so-naughty rocker 17, and then with the sincere ballad Headed for a Heartbreak. 17 continued rock's long and proud tradition of celebrating sex with teenage girls. That combined with Winger's winking come hither facial expressions in the accompanying music video.
You almost called them wankers.
That combined with Wingers, not wankers, Wingers winking come hither facial expressions in the accompanying music video made it ripe for controversy and, of course, mainstream chart appeal. Here's the surprising thing. The song is actually pretty good, featuring swingy bluesy riffs, an oddly timed syncopated rhythm, and rapid-fire diddly-diddly-diddly-dee lead playing. For a metal song, this thing is almost danceable. I'm guessing this was a popular song for strippers to do their thing too back in the day. 17 reached 26 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the spring of 1989. If you were anyone in glam metal, you definitely had to have a power ballad or at least a gooey love song in your front burner repertoire, and Winger, of course, followed suit. It chased the success of 17 with Headed for a Heartbreak, a much more conventional metal song than 17. This had prom season, slow dance season squarely in mind, and not too coincidentally, it hit airwaves in May of 1989. The song is driven by a dramatic keyboard line and bluesy lead playing. Kip Winger is in some distress here, and he reaches for the high end of his vocal register to express his pain. But it doesn't really sound like pain. Actually, it sounds much more like love, which is pretty weird for a breakup song. But the masses didn't care too much. It just fell for the earnest and reverby sensuality, which includes a burning guitar solo that fades along with the song in its coda. Turns out the most obvious fuckboys that rose from the glam metal major label Feeding Frenzy could crank out some gourmet pop metal. Go figure. Next up, Skid Row with 18 in Life and I Remember You. Skid Row was probably the most successful of these second-tier American glam metal bands. Yet another import, Skid Row was formed in New Jersey in the mid-1980s. Founding member Snake Sabo was actually briefly a member of Bon Jovi before forming Skid Row. Like these other bands, Skid Row rode the wave of hype and scored a record deal. Aided in large part by the stage presence and fabulously emotive voice of lead singer Sebastian Bach, the band hit the big time in 1989, scoring hits with 18 in Life and I Remember You off their self-titled debut album. Each song is a unique spin on the heavy metal ballad formula. 18 in Life is the more conceptual and operatic of the two, spinning a tale of a dude named Ricky, a, quote, young boy with a heart of stone, end quote, who screwed up one night and killed a young kid after shooting his gun into the air. That, oh dear, landed Ricky in prison for life. The song
Bad aim.
Yeah, bad aim. The song is a slow-burning banger with a catchy chorus and grade A screams from Bach. Chances are you've heard this song, as it's never really left rock radio rotation and has gained 333 million plus plays on Spotify. 18 in Life reached number 4 on the singles chart in the summer of 1989, but it may just be number 1 on your glam metal loving heart. Skid Row followed up the success of 18 in Life in the fall of 1989 with a more traditional power ballad called I Remember You. Like White Lion's Wait, the song was ready-made pop. Starting out with acoustic strumming and deep-throated singing from Bach, it elevates into the Scream King territory by song's end, cranking out an eminently singable chorus that evokes an easy nostalgia. This time, the band hit number 6 on the pop charts. The band's rise was swift and aggressive enough, and the good vibes carried over into the early 1990s. The follow-up to the first album, Slave to the Grind, debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 Albums chart in the summer of 1991. On that record, the band showed a surprisingly harder edge, growing sort of punky even. Slave to the Grind was arguably the last commercial grasp for glam metal, as grunge hit the big time in fall 1991 and snuffed out the embers of the LA-styled metal thing for good within the span of a year.
Can I say something about I Remember You?
Yeah.
The lyrics are so bad and so cringy. They make White Lines when the children cry sound like a Bob Dylan song. Seriously.
Yeah.
The lyrics are atrocious.
Yeah, they are pretty bad. They're pretty lousy. But Skid Row remains as emblematic of any band of the glam metal aesthetic. Slick, screamy, leathered and chained, and hairsprayed to the hilt. These two hit singles demonstrate that big time. Next up, Great Whites, Once Bitten, Twice Shy. Now, before they burned down a Rhode Island rock club to the ground with their pyro and killed 100 people in 2003, Great White, an actual Los Angeles-bred band, was a respected purveyor of glam metal glory. The band took a long time to gain renown, having formed originally way back in 1977. 12 years later and a whole lot of hanging and banging later, Great White reached MTV Airplay Nirvana in 1989 with Once Bitten, Twice Shy, a cover of a mid-70s boogie-woogie nugget from British rocker Ian Hunter. Great White maintains the inherently great boogie-wooginess of the song while also pouring in conventionally hair metal lead guitar and screamy, yelpy vocals from band leader Jack Russell. Yes, the guy's name was Jack Russell. Great White's swing-tastic cover of Once Bitten, Twice Shy reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, and hey, it stayed hot enough over the years to eventually be a true real-life scorcher. Oh. Yeah. Sorry, folks. Next up, Warrant's Heaven and Cherry Pie. Here's another real, actual Los Angeles band. Warrant formed in 1984, right as the glam metal scene of the Sunset Strip was reaching fever pitch. The young band cut its teeth on the Strip over the next several years, and by 1989, it had been signed by Columbia Records and released a wonderfully titled debut album, Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinkin' Rich. The album produced the biggest hit on this whole lightning round list, the so cheesy it's almost perfect power ballad Heaven, which reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song starts slow. It starts with a slow acoustic boil with lead singer Janie Lane's voice squarely at the top of the mix. Unlike Winger's Headed for a Heartbreak, this was no accidental prom slow dancer. Lane pours it on way thick here, Check out this lyric. Quote, how I love the way you move and the sparkle in your eyes. There's a color deep inside them like blue suburban sky. When I come home late at night and you're in bed asleep, I wrap my arms around you so I can feel you breathe. I don't need to be a Superman as long as you will always be my biggest fan. Ooh, that makes my
Ooh.
pussy just twinkle with delight. So does the soaring, so does the soaring glorious outro choruses to the song. Heaven really awesomely isn't too far away in this band's orbit. They just make you believe, or at least make you want to believe badly, deeply, madly. Truly, they just want to make you believe. Such is the power of glam metal for chicks, man. Warrant rode their wave of popularity into the next year, returning to the pop charts by taking an opposite tack. If they can succeed by playing the sensitive lover man, they can do it by being as blatantly misogynistic as possible. Cherry Pie was the title track to the band's second album, released in the fall of 1990. The energetically riffing, plotting song with its titillating video featuring a dancing, winking model named Bobby Brown they were both immediate hits, banging as they did with out-of-control id of a 16-year-old boy. And here's actual lyric from this song. Well, swinging on the front porch, swinging on the lawn, swinging where we want because there ain't nobody home, swinging to the left and swinging to the right. Think about baseball, I'll swing all night. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Swinging in the living room, swinging in the kitchen. Most folks don't care because they're too busy bitching. Swinging in there because she wants me to feed her, so I mixed up the batter and she licked the beater. Yeah, there's no subtlety to be had here. In case you're rolling your eyes, we can at least celebrate the fact that Lane wound up marrying Brown after they met filming this video. She was magnificently his Cherry Pie. Cherry Pie, the song, reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. Much like with Skid Row, Warrant's early 90s success was short-lived, as grunge killed all of its momentum too. But at least we'll always have Heaven and Cherry Pie, two songs that still put a smile on my face that's 10 miles wide. Dig it. And finally, we end this lightning round list with Slaughter and their songs Up All Night and Fly to the Angels. Credit Slaughter for excellent timing. They got into the glam metal game just as the window to do so was closing. The band formed in Las Vegas in 1988, assembled by two former members of the band, the Vinnie Vincent Invasion. Anyone who works with Vincent, Ace Frehley's short-lived replacement in Kiss, doesn't have to work too hard to establish pop metal bona fides. And Slaughter indeed, basically did so. And it found itself with a major label deal and the release of its debut album, Stick It To You, in 1990. These guys didn't have to invent anything original by the time of their launch. The glam metal thing was firmly ingrained in the late 80s into 1990 DNA of MTV by then. So there was nothing particularly original about this band other than Mark Slaughter's fabulous ability to out-Starscream Cinderella's Tom Kiefer when he sang his heart out. Like Warren on its path to two-hit wonder glory, Slaughter served up both a ballad and a nad-pumping rocker. The latter came first for Slaughter. Up All Night is simple, big, dumb fun. The band serves up a party anthem with slick riffage and sexy time cooing on the verses by Slaughter. Then the band hits with a Viking-like chorus of Up All Night, Sleep All Day. The song is so slickly produced that Slaughter probably should have just given Def Leppard producer Mutt Lange a royalty just on general principle. Up All Night reached number 27 on the Billboard 200. Same thing with the requisite hit Power Ballad. So slick it produced its own grease. Fly to the Angels aspires to reach the same poppy realms as When the Children Cry in Heaven. Slaughter goes full falsetto on the big dumb lighter lighting chorus. This song strives and strains mightily to sound more important than it actually is. You got to fly with the angels. Okay, Mark, I'll get right on that. This song plays like Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child of Mine without any of its earnestness or guitar virtuosity. It's by far the worst song on this whole list. What a way to end this streak, right, Arturo?
Oy vey. Listen, when we publish this episode very, very soon, Chris, you're going to put out a Spotify playlist that will have all of these songs, plus several songs by Motley Crue, Poison, and Guns N' Roses. Well, if you put that entire gigantic playlist that you're going to put together, all these songs, plus some Crue, some Poison, some GNR, And if you manage to, you won't do this, but if you manage to throw in a couple of U2 or REM songs sprinkled throughout and listen to that playlist on repeat 5 times a day, up to maybe 6 times a day, every day, you will know what it feels like to be a young kid like me of my age in
No
1988,
shit.
living in South Florida, which is where I spent my teen years listening to rock radio. That's what rock radio was like back then.
Yep.
And you listen and you take into account, take a step back and about all these songs, like especially not the U2 and the REM, but the other stuff, they all blur into the same song. They all blur into the same style, the same solos, the same voice, the same lyrical sentiment, the same fucking riffs. It's no wonder when Nirvana came on the radio in fall of '91, it blew all this shit away. And
Pretty
Pearl Jam
much.
too, and Pearl Jam too, by the way. They
Yeah.
also, deserve their props for this. There's a reason why the alternative grunge and the alternative slash grunge movement took took hold in late 91 and afterward, because it just gave authenticity and sincerity to rock music, and it crushed all this shit. And like Tom Petty said, like a scythe, it just cut the heads off. And needed it, because my God, there's such a monotony and a is monotonous and ubiquitous, which is a pretty bad combo to
Yeah, I was
have.
gonna say that's a really bad combo.
It's a bad combo to have when it comes to music. So yeah, like seriously, folks, listen to the playlist Chris puts together and imagine a couple of U2 or REM songs sprinkled throughout. That's what rock radio was like in South Florida, 1987, 88, and 89. Just
Yeah.
this shit on repeat over and over and over and over again. That is why I have such a big spot, a really big spot in my heart where I cherish bands like U2 and REM, because they were the saving grace for me back then when I was young, listening to rock radio. Man, this sucks. Man, this sucks. Man, this sucks. Oh, wait, that's a cool U2 song. Man, this sucks. Man, this sucks. Man, oh, that's a cool REM song. That's what the late 80s rock radio was like.
Yeah, and I'll agree with the caveat that a few of those songs that I just described are actually pretty good. Uh, best song on the whole list might actually be 17 by Winger. That's actually a pretty good song. So like I said, some of that was bearable, some of that was mighty, and you got to give it up for Heaven. Like I said, my pussy does twinkle when I hear that song. No question. So anyway. Let us move on. So now we're going to cover the three most important bands of this late 80s period in LA as far as the mainstream goes. Motley Crue, Poison, and Guns N' Roses. Now, you'll notice that Bon Jovi is not included on that list. And that it's basically that is so for a pretty good reason. Bon Jovi was never an LA band.
Yeah.
They were always based in New Jersey. And they cut their teeth in Jersey and the Eastern Shoreboard, and they maintained their base. I think Bon Jovi lives in Philly now, but they maintained their base in on the Jersey Shore the whole time, and never really had much to do with LA. They're like the only band that didn't have to kneel at the altar of LA to make it big. So that's why they're not included. Any addendum thought to that, Art?
Yeah, even I'll admit there are like maybe 2 or 3 Bon Jovi songs I like.
Yeah,
Wanted Dead
yeah,
or Alive is a good song.
there's several.
I like the one they did for the Young Guns 2 soundtrack, Blaze of Glory. That's a
Yeah.
good one. I like
Yeah.
a couple of songs off the New Jersey album. I like Bad Medicine. I
Yeah.
like their critique of televangelism. Lay Your Hands on Me.
Yeah.
Bon Jovi. I'm not a great band, but hey, they had their moments.
Gotcha.
The sun shined on their ass the sun shined on the dog's ass a few times with that band.
Yeah, well, there you go. But we're not talking about Bon Jovi, so let's start talking about these other three bands. Like we said, Motley Crue, Poison, and Guns N' Roses. First up is Motley Crue, which we talked about at length in the last episode of this series, this quick little LA in the 80s series as far as their breakout. So now the story continues. Initially, for Motley Crue, the band's lifestyle was glammier than their actual music. While their lives were knee-deep in decadence and depravity, which we discussed on that first episode of this two-episode discussion, the music on 1981's Too Fast for Love and 1983's Shout at the Devil was more of a punk metal hybrid, with a huge drum sound and riffier approach to guitar arrangements than many of their LA metal peers. Both albums are great in my opinion, finding a balance between tough and over-the-top showy. The latter album, Shout at the Devil, is what fueled Motley Crue's breakthrough onto the MTV airwaves and onto the album charts in late 1983 and into 84. Shout at the Devil went 4 times platinum. The success evidently went to the heads of bassist Nikki Sixx, drummer Tommy Lee, singer Vince Neil, and guitarist Mick Mars, as their subsequent releases over the course of the 1980s grew poppier and glammier, picking up the sheen, the sexiness, and the swagger of Los Angeles' partying heart more concretely and directly. The band also changed up its look several times, at first growing more fembot in 1985, and then closer to biker chic by the time of the 1989 album, Dr. Feelgood. Along the way, Motley Crue produced a pop metal body of work that made them the standard bearers for the genre. If Shout at the Devil made Motley Crue a household MTV name, then 1985's Theater of Pain propelled the band to international megastardom. The band obviously went into the studio swinging for the mainstream fences, and the album in that regard is a home run. The album begins with the alluring riffage and stomp of City Boy Blues and then segues into a cover of an old Brownsville station banger called Smokin' in the Boys' Room, which became a signature song for Motley Crue. Really, the latter song was a perfect choice for a cover by this band of bad boy rule breakers, possessing a hip-shaking, rump-wiggling energy that blasts through beautifully here. As I said on our last episode, for as much as we want to focus on the band's image and scuzzy backstory, we also really need to focus on the music. This was a really, really good band. Really tight, really fun band. Tommy Lee's drumming is top-notch throughout Theater of Pain, as is Mick Mars' guitar playing and Vince Neil's vocal. It's all the sound of a mainstream hungry band finding its larger pop music voice. The standout song here is actually the album's main power ballad, the gloriously lofty Home Sweet Home. We first hear Tommy Lee on piano rather than drums, offering up a lovely progression of notes that resonate emotionally and almost instantaneously. From there, Neil croons earnestly about his lonely, longing heart, and the song then builds to a marvelously rocking crescendo before ending with those same Tommy Lee piano notes to put us in our feels one last time. Home Sweet Home was one of the best glam metal power ballads of the era. Theater of Pain, the album, reached number 6 on the Billboard 200 albums chart, becoming a success despite growing addiction issues among the band members and the backdrop drama of a car accident that killed Hanoi Rocks drummer Nicholas Razzle Dingley and left Vince Neil in legal hot water as the not so sober driver of the car. Motley Crue once again neared the top of the charts in 1987 with the follow-up to Theater of Pain, the meaner, tougher, more bluesy Girls, Girls, Girls. The album is notably especially for its anthemic, awesomely glabbed-out title song, an ode to all the strip clubs that kept the band inspired on the road across America. Mick Mars' guitar playing was never better than it was here on Girls, 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 with his riffs fat and his soloing even fatter. The album also features opening song Wild Side, the video for which seemingly played nonstop on MTV throughout both 1987 and 1988. The song's main riff harkens back to the muscularity and agility that featured heavily throughout Too Fast for Love, and the bridge slows things down to an engaging bop. Meanwhile, Neil sings about the danger of living life like you're about to pass out in a ditch and not remembering you killed your buddy's girl last night. This band was really, quote, kicking ass on the wild side, end quote, during this era. Other standout on Girls, 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 the album includes Dancing on Glass, which is driven by a boogie-woogie groove and a ginormous riff that would have made Kiss's Ace Frehley blush. The melodic, ready-made for MTV piano-driven ballad You're All I Need, featuring surprisingly affecting harmony vocals on the chorus, and the bone-crunching metal ditty All in the Name of, on which Neil normalizes lusting after a 15-year-old girl.
Oh.
Yeah. Yep. The excesses. Yep.
Winger had 17. No, Motley Crue says 15.
Yeah, they had it at 15. Yeah, they went 2 below. The excesses of the band's drug and alcohol abuse reached a point by the middle of 1988 that it was detracting from the band's focus on the music and the touring, and the band's management put its foot down and forced all 4 members of the band, especially the extremely strung out on heroin Nikki Sixx, into rehab all at once. The depravity of the strip might have become a hell of a lucrative export, but it also carried with it a darkness that left a lot of its participants in rough shape as the 80s came to a close and the 90s approached. Crüe might as well have won a gold medal in that aspect of strip living. So then, after a period of several months, the band emerged newly clean and sober and was once again ready to rock balls. For the follow-up to Girls, 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 1989's Dr. Feelgood, the band hired producer Bob Rock, who later achieved greater fame as the producer for several Metallica albums in the 1990s and early 2000s, including the Black Album. Rock was a talented engineer who could capture the underlying power and bass heaviness of a band and present it thusly on record. Dr. Feelgood may not be Motley Crue's best album. That's still Too Fast for Love. But Dr. Feelgood is the band's most instantly accessible and commercially powerful affair. The album begins with a menacing wall of guitar and bass noise called TNT, and in parentheses, Terror in Tinseltown, which sets an immediately rough tone. That 45-second intro then folds its way into the opening boom boom bang bang of the title track. Lee's drums never sounded deeper or more thunderous than they do here, and Vince Neil's vocals were never cleaner or meaner. This album spawned 5 hits, the videos for which achieved heavy airplay on MTV. There was the lovey-dovey power ballad Without You, a paean by Tommy Lee dedicated to his wife at the time, actress Heather Locklear. There also was the lightning-quick rocker Kickstart My Heart, which energetically bounces along in groove-tastic fashion and features the band shouting hey-ho vocals on the chorus. There was the at first lilting, then hard-chugging power ballad, Don't Go Away Mad, Just Go Away, and also the sing-songy glam metal tsunami, Same Old Situation, SOS. Motley Crue never sounded more confident and self-assured than they did on Dr. Feelgood, a testament to the band's regained focus and Bob Rock's formidable in-studio chops. This was the Crue's peak as a band, as the album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 Albums chart and sold more than 6 million copies in the U.S., the album did. A falling out that ensued between Nikki Sixx and Vince Neil ensured Crue's commercial relevance would not extend beyond the 1980s, and by the end of the 90s, the band was a full-blown legacy act, one that successfully rolls on to this day. Arturo, what's your thought about this stretch of the Motley Crue story?
I'm not as apologetic about Motley Crue's music as you are. I will say this, though. It says a lot about Motley Crue and just overall their music and their legacy and whatnot, that in the 1990s, they became more notable for basically Tommy Lee's love life and being in the tabloid newspapers with Pamela Anderson than for anything they did musically.
That's true.
I remember
they became celebrity fodder.
Yeah, he became a tabloid celebrity.
Yeah, Nikki Sixx married Donna D'Errico.
Yeah, and they became known for that more than their music. And my God, does Motley Crue's music in the 90s suck balls. Oh, my God.
Well, in the 90s, yeah, hell yeah. When they worked with John Corabi and then they invited Vince Neil back for Generation Swine. Generation Barf, more like it.
Yeah, we're an alternative rock band now. Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, you're not. You're Motley fucking Crue. You'll always be Motley Crue. And they gladly accepted that and have made a bunch of money touring since then. So I guess more power to them since then. So moving on from Motley Crue, we're going to cover Poison. Oh boy. So as we said earlier, the rise of the LA glam metal scene in the early 1980s inspired lots and lots and lots of outsider bands to emigrate to the Sunset Strip in search of their own glory. The highest profile and most successful of these blatant, shameless shameless carpetbagger bands was unquestionably Poison, which became MTV darlings in 1986 and lived on the forefront of that channel's rotation for several years afterward. Poison built its reputation as perhaps the hardest working band in all of LA once they arrived there from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. There's that town again, in 1983. Led by cocky, in-your-face lead singer Bret Michaels, no one flyered the living shit out of the Sunset Strip and promoted their shows more fervently than Poison. Between their unavoidable profile in the scene that resulted and the ridiculously over-the-top horn-dog sexuality sung about so affectionately in its material, the band inevitably attracted attention. After co-founding guitarist Matt Smith quit the band in frustration over not yet being signed to a major label in 1985, the remaining members of Poison auditioned and then hired an eccentric but ultra-talented guitarist named C.C. DeVille, whose dynamic playing and showmanship gave the band even more of an edge. As an aside here, Rolling Stone reported in a 2015 history of the Sunset Strip that Slash of Guns N' Roses fame auditioned for Poison. Can you imagine Slash and Poison? That would have either been a perfectly good waste of a prodigal
Would have been the
talent.
worst. Would have been the worst decision of his life.
Yeah, it would have been a perfectly good of a waste of a
Hello.
prodigal talent, or would have catapulted Bret Michaels to a more celebrated status than he clearly deserved. One of the two. Anyway, with CC DeVille now in tow, Poison persisted, and eventually they signed with Enigma Records in 1986 and released its debut album, Look What the Cat Dragged In, soon after. The album became a surprise smash, spawning 3 chart hits and gaining traction on the MTV airwaves. The high lowlights here, the very high lowlights here were the ultra horny, ultra misogynistic I Want Action and the even more sex crazed Talk Dirty to Me. Poison, what I like to call a great terrible band. CC DeVille was a pretty good guitarist, but the rest of the band was wholly mediocre, and the songs were consistently dopey and shallow. But they were entertainingly dopey and shallow. These guys were a strangely lovable quartet. They definitely served up memorable choruses, and with their telegenic hair and makeup combos, they were built for MTV success. Look What the Cat Dragged In slowly built momentum and reached number 3 on the Billboard 200 albums chart by February of 1987, and the album eventually sold more than 3 million copies in the U.S. After spending 1987 touring as an opening act for Rat, Quiet Riot, and others, Poison returned to the studio and pumped out their next album, Open Up and Say Ah, in May of 1988. The band moved its musical needle only slightly with this album, serving more horn dog anthems like Nothing But a Good Time and a rocked out cover of Loggins and Messina's Your Mama Don't Dance. But Poison showed it was capable of a little tenderness, and to steal a line from my partner, it showed that the sun could shine on a dog's ass once in a great while. Every Rose Has Its Thorn may be the mother of all glam metal power ballads, a breakup lament of the finest order. It starts out as an acoustic strummer and then builds into fabulous pyrotechnics from DeVille before settling back into Michael's emotional soul bearing. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and remains a staple of classic rock radio. Open Up and Say Ah reached number 2 on the Billboard 200 albums chart and sold over 5 million copies. Poison kept on rising, and in 1990, it released another top-selling album, this one called Flesh and Blood. Frankly, this isn't a very good record, proving to be pretty generic and uninspired, despite the presence of probably my favorite Poison song, the hilariously titled ode to Bret Michaels' cock, Unskinny Bop, and also generally more skilled artsy guitar playing from DeVille. Unskinny Bop is yet another enjoyable sex romp from a band that thrived on them, but it wasn't enough to lift the rest of the record, which still managed to sell more than 3 million copies and generate a modest hit in the earnest ballad, Something to Believe In. So what really is the legacy of Poison? They're the band that proved more than anyone that the LA thing was a real national phenomenon, hopping into it the way they did as outsiders and catching fire. They also proved that singing about sex in the crassest terms will never truly go out of style, nor ever stop being fertile mining ground for dumb, fun hit singles. Additionally, they proved the power of MTV to make tastes and assign hit status to even the lamest of bands. Ultimately, it's hard to tell the full story of LA rock in the 1980s without giving it up for the earned success of Poison. Arturo, what say you?
Yeah, my thing with Poison is just if you take all the songs and the bands that we heard in that lightning round and you wrap them up together, and Poison basically is just an amalgam and a composite of all that was cheesy and corny and lame and dumb about the LA glam metal scene. And so in that way, they were like the ultimate band of that scene in a way because of that. They represented everything. They were all of the above when it comes to LA. They were the most generic. Everything about it. Like, what does LA glam metal sound like? Poison.
Poison. Yeah, pretty much. I can tell you have British friends, by the way. Composite.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Poison was kind of like the Exhibit A of the late period of the codified and commodified version of the LA glam metal thing. Not the original version. We talked about that last episode. That wasn't them. They were the commodified version. They were the product that resulted from the initial success of Quiet Riot and Motley Crue. So there you go. And now we go on to the best band on this entire list by far, by far, Guns N' Roses. So Guns N' Roses is arguably one of the best heavy metal bands of all time. They might also be the most quintessentially LA band of the 80s. They embodied all of the excess and depravity of the Sunset Strip scene, but they did it in a way that was much more musically exciting and original than their peers. The drinking and drug use were fully amped up, but so were the grooves and the melodies and the unified purpose to take over rock and roll with their rough and tough chops. They took the pop leanings of glam metal and melded them with the inherent scuzziness and boogie-woogie majesty of early 70s Rolling Stones. It was an eccentric mix, but one that produced some of the best music of its kind. So how'd this band come to be? Here's an origin story. The band is actually the remnants of two different bands. One outfit called Hollywood Rose, and an early version of the band LA Guns, which gained some measure of prominence in the late 80s. So there you had Guns, and you had Roses. Get it? Hollywood Rose consisted of eventual LA Guns frontman Tracy Guns, Guns N' Roses rhythm guitarist Izzy Stradlin, his childhood friend from Indiana, singer W. Axl Rose, real name William Bailey, and an eccentric young guitarist named Saul / Hudson. That band broke up in 1984, and the first iteration of LA Guns followed with Rose as a vocalist. Eventually, in 1985, the first version of Guns N' Roses rose up, with Tracy Guns serving as its first lead guitarist. The band's first bassist, Ole Bache, was fired after only a few gigs, and a young bassist named Duff McKagan was brought in as a replacement. The band played its first gig at the Troubadour in 1985, after which Rose and Guns soon had a falling out, leading to Guns departing the band. Eventually, Slash replaced Guns, and drummer Steven Adler was also hired. With Izzy Stradlin also in tow, the classic Guns version of Guns N' Roses was in place. After touring along the West Coast and earning gigs at clubs like the Roxy and the Troubadour, the band captured the attention of Geffen Records, with which the band signed in 1986. In December of 1986, the band released a 4-song EP called Live Like a Suicide, and it continued to build momentum. It spent 1987 working on the songs that would form the core of its debut album, Appetite for Destruction. Working with producer Mike Klink, Guns N' Roses recorded Appetite over the course of the first few months of 1987, a process that was prolonged by the pain-in-the-ass Rose's insistence on recording vocals one lyric at a time. The band finally released Appetite for Destruction on July 21st, 1987. The reception for it was initially cold. It took almost a year for MTV to begin airing the video for Welcome to the Jungle, and only after David Geffen personally requested the network do so. The song and the video gained a positive following, and the video received heavier airplay as a result. In the summer of 1988, the band released the power ballad Sweet Child of Mine, you all know it, as its second single, and the song took off big time almost immediately, reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 by summer's end. At that point, Guns N' Roses could be considered a huge success, and its following only grew from there, as it rightfully should have. I'm of the opinion that Appetite for Destruction is the single best album put by anybody in the 1980s. The album's energy is undying, as is its songcraft and its attitude. It's So Easy, written by McKagan and Rose, captures that attitude perfectly with the lyric, "You think you're so cool, well why don't you just fuck off?" The album mixes a scuzzbucket metal heart through songs like Out to Get Me, Mr. Brownstone, and Rocket Queen, with pop metal gems like Night Train and Paradise City. Slash's guitar playing is awe-inspiring throughout, as is Steven Adler's powerful drumming. The album eventually reached number 1 on the Billboard 200 Albums chart and has gone on to sell more than 30 million copies in the U.S., making it one of the top-selling albums of any kind of all time. The massive success of Appetite for Destruction afforded GNR the rare ability to follow up its big hit with something of a vanity project. GNR Lies hit record shelves in November 1988. Surprised it was that early, actually, but it turns out it came out in November 1988. This album was a combination of the tracks from Live Like a Suicide, that EP, with several newly recorded acoustic songs. Chief among these were the top 10 hit ballad Patience, a song marvelously crooned by Rose and rendered sweetly acoustic guitar by Slash, and also the controversial tracks Once in a Million and Used to Love Her. The former raised eyebrows and pissed prudes everywhere off with the lyric, "Immigrants and faggots, they make no sense to me. They come to this country and spread some fucking disease." The yeesh. The latter is just a plain old murder ballad celebrating the demise of a girl who talked too much and drove Axl nuts. This band knew how to get a rise out of people by this point for sure. With its originality and mean streak, Guns N' Roses perhaps extended the life of the LA scene by a couple of years. Much like Motley Crue before it, the band set a standard that all the pretenders could only aspire to. They became the tail that wagged the dog, so to speak. Interestingly, their musical versatility and darker leanings were arguably more akin to one of the bands Arturo will discuss in the second half of this episode, Jane's Addiction. The energy and the lack of a box you ultimately couldn't place either band in made them odd fellow peers of a sort. But I'll let Art assert that more with more clarity in his segment. Art, your thought on Guns N' Roses?
Yeah, I have a list or a little segment, an area of music that I call all-time great 5-star classic albums that are somehow yet still a little bit overrated. I have Michael Jackson's Off the Wall there. I have Marvin Gaye's What's Going On there. And I have this album there. I'm not saying it sucks. In no way does it suck. It is a 5-star classic. It's one of the greatest albums of all time. But I don't have it nearly as high as you do on whatever your list may be. It is in no way, shape, or form, in my opinion, the single greatest album of the 1980s. To me, that is still U2's The Joshua Tree, followed by... no, sorry. That's Prince's Purple Rain, followed by U2's The Joshua Tree. For me, Appetite for... The reason I think it's overrated is this. Yes, it was huge in its time, massively great. It has kind of stood the test of time as a great rock and roll record. Is the only, in my opinion, the only album and the only band of this LA glam metal scene
it's probably aged better than any album of its sort ever.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, and definitely of all the albums in the 80s, I think it's aged the best. It gets more resonant to me with each listen, even here now, 38 years later.
I don't know. I think U2's The Joshua Tree is aged better. But anyway, but yeah, of that LA glam metal scene, this album has aged by far the best out of the bunch. But I don't rank it high and among like I don't put it top 100 or even top 200. Here's the thing: for a band that was so big and so popular and so epochal, an album that was so epochal, who did they influence? Who did they inspire? What bands that came after Guns N' Roses have all gone on to say, man, GNR, such a huge influence on our band, such a huge influence and inspiration to our music scene, to our songwriting, to our style, to our guitar sound, to our lyrics, to the way we sing songs. But you hear that about
that's fair, but it also speaks to how original the band was.
I wouldn't go that far. You hear that about Nirvana. You hear that about Metallica. You fucking hear it about Pearl Jam even. You hear it about Radiohead. You hear it about so many bands. Like, what bands go out there and say, yeah, Guns N' Roses were a big influence and inspiration on these bands and on this subgenre of rock? Absolutely zero. If the best thing you can come up with is Buck Cherry, you don't have much.
Yeah. I mean, part of that is probably due to Axl's personality and Axl had in subsequent years kind of rubbed people the wrong way, starting a riot in a Metallica show.
A raging egomaniac and a narcissist, raging misogynist and homophobe. Come on, he just wasn't like I'm a firm believer that you got to separate an artist's personal life from their work. Axl Rose makes it difficult for you to do.
Yeah, he does make it difficult. I'll give him that. And that might be one of the reasons why they don't have the followers. The other reason is I think the album to me is just a weird, cool, like singular record. It's boogie woogie glam metal. And like how do you even approach that? Or how do you, that was like true lightning in a bottle, what they came up with.
I mean, the bands that I'm going to talk about are arguably more influential and more and inspired more bands than GNR did. I'm sorry. But
I'm not going to argue with you against that one, but I stick to my guns and Roses. And and I still maintain that Appetite for Destruction is the single best album of the 80s. It's aged better than any album, and it just has a majesty to it, and just a coolness to it, and a weirdness to it that makes it indelible.
On this episode, we discuss the Los Angeles rock music scene in the second half of the 1980s. For the next episode, we're going to stay in the 1980s as we analyze the career of a band from Minneapolis that started out as a hardcore punk band, but by the time they disbanded in 1987, they had blazed a trail for the sound of alternative rock and pop punk to come in the 1990s. We're talking, of course, about Husker Du. Even though they practically created a template for the hybrid of abrasive noise and melodic songcraft that would later influence the likes of Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Green Day, Foo Fighters, and more, they were a decidedly under-the-radar underground band in their time, even during the brief stint they spent on a major record label. We're going to break down why they were great, why they generally aren't as remembered as they should, and why younger generations of rock music fans should go out of their way to check them out. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you Husker Du, an underrated legacy.
Like we established on the first part of this two-part series on LA rock in the 1980s, LA wasn't all about glam metal, and there was life beyond the Sunset Strip that went out into the burbs and to 8 miles away from the strip as well. And there was an underground scene there that had all kinds of cool things happening. You know, we established that they had X and the Gun Club in the early 80s. And here in the late 80s, you had a couple of bands that were doing some genre bending and just doing some mind-blowing stuff and proving to be hugely influential during this period. And Arturo is going to discuss both of these bands. We're talking about the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Jane's Addiction. Arturo, what do you have to offer about these bands and about the LA underground scene during this era?
Well, basically, the underground alternative scene of the mid to late 80s is all about the Chili Peppers and Jane's Addiction. It really is. We could talk about the band L7, who are awesome, but they will be discussed in a very grunge-specific series that we have in mind for the future. So we're leaving L7 aside. They deserve their own props and somewhere else for another time. Let's focus on the Chili's, on the Peppers and Jane's. Let's focus first on the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now, for younger generation music fans or just Gen Z music fans, hearing the words Red Hot Chili Peppers and underground band in the same sentence is just ridiculous. The Chili's are one of the biggest and most commercially successful bands in the world. That's like calling Maroon 5 an indie band. But yes, folks, there was a time when the Chili Peppers were indeed seen and thought of as a cutting-edge underground from left field out there band, and that time was the 1980s. The original core of the band, Anthony Kiedis, Michael Balzari, later to be known as Flea, Hillel Slovak, and Jack Irons, were nothing more than Los Angelino misfit kids who buddied around in Fairfax High School. Kiedis, originally from Michigan and a product of divorced parents, moved to LA when he was 14 years old to live with aspiring actor and his aspiring actor and drug-dealing father. Also a product of a broken home, Balzari, Flea, became adept at music at a young age thanks to his jazz musician stepfather, and he eventually graduated from the trumpet to the bass. Slovak, whose parents were immigrant Holocaust survivors, started to play guitar at the age of 13 when he was given the instrument as a bar mitzvah present, and he soon became incredibly proficient with it. A couple of years after high school in 1982, the four formed a band called Tony Flo and the Miraculously Majestic Masters of Mayhem. A year later, they thankfully changed their name to the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Their at the time unique and unusual hybrid sound of punk, funk, and early rap made waves in LA's club scene, enough to garner major label interest. Lucky boys that they were, that they came from and lived in the capital city for the American music industry back then. However, guitarist Slovak and drummer Irons had their talents involved with another band at the same time called What Is This? And they got a major record deal with MCA in autumn of 1983. Just a few weeks later, oddly enough, the nascent Chili Peppers also got a record deal with EMI. Slovak and Irons thought prospects were better with What Is This, so they helped Kiedis and Flea recruit drummer Cliff Martinez from the band The Weirdos, as well as guitarist Jack Sherman. This was the lineup that went into the studio to record the Red Hot Chili Peppers' self-titled debut album. Released in summer of 1984 and produced by Gang of Four guitarist Andy Gill, all the songs on the album were written and honed on stage with Slovak and Irons. Sherman and Martinez were basically hired guns, and the results on record sound like it. It was a revelatory and original mix of styles, as mentioned before, punk, funk, and hip-hop's early rapping style, that resembled Gang of Four and the Minutemen, with less James Brown, more Parliament funkadelic, way more sped up, and some weird-ass white boy rapping. Unfortunately, the drumming and guitar playing don't capture the requisite fire that the original players surely must have given this music, and the production is rather stale and flat. Nevertheless, the album got some play on underground college radio, and the band got their name out there by touring the country. Contrasts between lifestyle choices of the band members, hint, Kiedis was a druggie, Sherman wasn't, meant Sherman and Rodriguez weren't long for the band, with both getting sacked. Luckily, and at the same time, Slovak got disillusioned with What Is This and rejoined the Red Hot Chili Peppers in early 1985. Correction, Rodriguez was not sacked at this time. He got sacked later. Rodriguez was still with the band. It's hard to imagine now, but back then, major record labels actually gave young bands a chance to develop, even if their first album wasn't a success. This was the case as EMI helped put this, or pair, this motley gang of junky punk funkers with the legendary George Clinton in the producer's chair for their second album. But before we go into that album, what does Mr. O'Connor have as his take on the Chili Peppers origin story?
Yeah, Chili Peppers are definitely an interesting take, because they come from several sources: surf culture, drug culture, funk culture, punk culture, and they kind of mix it all together. So they were like this ultimate hybrid band of a bunch of just strange guys getting together and putting that whole thing on. And it's interesting to think about it these days, with how big and how huge the Red Hot Chili Peppers have gotten over the last 30-something years, that Slovak and Irons actually thought that their other band was going to have a better shot at it. And, that they believed in that band more than they did in Kiedis and Flea. So that just kind of floors me. And, they eventually found their way back, but that whole thing just floors me.
Yeah. All right. The first album of their first truly great album, really, Freaky Styley from 1985. As a producer, and as you might expect, coming from the mastermind behind Parliament and Funkadelic, or Funkadelic and Parliament, George Clinton really brought out the funk in the Chili Peppers. That, combined with the return of true original Peppers guitarist Hillel Slovak, makes Freaky Styley the purest distillation of the band's freaky-deaky, funky-monkey early sound. Jungleman and American Ghost Dance groove like motherfuckers, while Black Eyed Blonde and Battleship bring the turbocharged punk funk that this band practically invented. And of course, there's the sophomoric romp, Catholic Schoolgirls Rule. A lot of Anthony Kiedis' early lyrics are super sexually charged to the point that some may deem them offensive and sexist.
Sophomoric.
Yeah. Honestly, that's fair. But here's where I deposit my defense. With the majority of the glam hair metal bands coming out of or flocking to LA during this time, there was a genuine menace and misogyny in their lyrics about and toward women. Seriously, just give a cursory listen to any album by Motley Crue, Poison, and even, or especially, Guns N' Roses. With Kiedis and the Peppers, there was more of a childish, juvenile nature to the band's sex raps that blunted whatever meanness or misogyny may or may not have been inherent. But hey, a woman might disagree with me. Chris?
Yeah. Freaky Styley I basically this is what happens when you send the Red Hot Chili Peppers to Detroit to hang out and do a whole bunch of cocaine with George Clinton for a month. Yeah, Clinton was paid $25,000 to record this, and he was in. Funny story with that is that he was in debt to his drug dealer at the time, and so as a make good, he allowed the drug dealer to contribute lyrics to one of the songs. So yeah, and Freaky Style, you're a bigger fan of it than I am. I mean, I think that some of it is really cool, but I think it's a little bit too one trick, and they were nowhere near maturing as a band at this point, and so there's only so much of the punk funk slop that one can have in a record, and I think that this pretty much breaks the bounds of it. Some truly great songs. Don't get me wrong, but there's also a fair amount of crap on it as well. So pretty uneven record for me.
Next, the Uplift Mofo Party Plan from 1987. With new producer Michael Beinhorn and original drummer Jack Irons back in tow, the Red Hot Chili Peppers went into the studio to record what would end up being one of their most difficult records. Both Anthony Kiedis and Hillel Slovak were going through crippling heroin addictions, but surprisingly enough, the band as a whole was on a creative roll, thanks to the true original members of the band making an album together for the first and eventually last time. Beinhorn was a positive influence as well, encouraging the band to expand their horizons by incorporating more elements into their sound, such as melodic pop, hints of heavy metal, and even reggae. Behind the Sun is blissful melodic sunshine pop done Chili Pepper style, while the grinding metal guitar riff of Backwoods ushers in the heaviest song the Peppers had done up to this point. Funky Crime practically invents the funk metal template that Faith No More would basically copy a couple of years later, while Me and My Friends and Skinny Sweaty Man provide the frantic, psychotic tempo punk funk that must have been awesome to hear live during this part of the band's career. There's the obligatory silly stupid sex song Party on Your Pussy. God. And they even do a bonkers cover of Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues,
Which is
that
great.
proves the Chili Peppers can take any song by any artist from any style and any genre and make it sound like the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yep.
The Uplift Mofo Party Plan was a turning point album for the band, as it was their first to break the top 200 in the Billboard album chart. In their hometown, they became the hip, cutting-edge alternative to the dominant glam metal scene, while they gained serious nationwide momentum as an underground buzz band. The video for Behind the Sun even got some MTV airplay. Yet what should have been a moment of modest triumph for the band ended in tragedy. Soon after the tour for the album finished in 1988, guitarist Hillel Slovak died of a heroin overdose. Not being able to cope with the devastating news, drummer Jack Irons quit the band soon afterward, leaving the Chili Peppers in disarray with their future in serious doubt. However, that set the stage for one of rock history's greatest comeback stories with their next album. Chris?
Yeah, Uplift Mofo Party Plan, good album. The revelation on here is Hillel Slovak and some of the things that he was doing as far as some of the plays that he was doing with melodic riffage and some of his interplay with Flea and just really building up the proceedings. Some of the songs like Behind the Sun. Was probably the best thing they had done up to that point, and it really kind of prefaced what came in. And basically, it's Hillel kind of did a more tasteful, restrained, and not as versatile version of what Frusciante brought to the band. John Frusciante, who joined the band and was Hillel's replacement for the next album. It was a little bit more restrained and a little bit more narrow than what Frusciante brought, but it kind of set the template. And Frusciante's even admitted that he kind of copied Hillel's and expanded and played on and built on Hillel's stylings on this record when he first came in. So that's really it for Uplift Mofo. Plus, yeah, a great cover of Subterranean Homesick Blues. Can't beat it. When Dylan goes in the hands of Anthony Kiedis, it becomes Anthony Kiedis. Enough said.
Yeah.
Yep.
And next, Mother's Milk from 1989. After the death of the band's guitarist and the departure of their drummer, some sense must have knocked into Anthony Kiedis's head as he got sober and weightlifter ripped for the next stage of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. For a few months, they employed Dwayne McKnight, formerly of George Clinton's Parliament, as guitarist, and former Dead Kennedys drummer D.H. Peligro, meaning danger in Spanish. However, they didn't quite gel with Kiedis and Flea and were soon fired. Enter the two guys who would formalize what is generally acknowledged as the Chili Peppers' classic lineup, that being powerhouse drummer Chad Smith and then 19-year-old guitar phenom John Frusciante. Smith brought hard rock jackhammer muscle to the band's rhythm section, while Frusciante's love of heavy metal and prog rock brought the rock, R-O-C-K, out of their punk funk style. With Michael Beinhorn producing again, Mother's Milk is a decidedly heavier record, but the funk never really is far away. Subway to Venus and Taste of Pain have the leanest funk grooves, while Sexy Mexican Maid, yes, you can guess what that album is about, is practically slinky funk porno music. Nobody Weird Like Me and Stone Cold Bush rock with a ferocity that they hadn't shown before, and their wild, raucous cover of Stevie Wonder's Higher Ground was a genuine breakthrough hit single, getting airplay on both MTV and rock radio. The album itself went gold, meaning in physical media terms, it sold 500,000 copies. Mother's Milk's success also meant the band got courted by Warner Brothers and were given a bigger major label deal with more and bigger promotion. The Red Hot Chili Peppers were inching away from the underground, starting to play bigger venues, expanding their fan base, and setting the stage for their major crossover to the mainstream within a couple of years. Chris?
Yeah, this album is pretty much a revelation with Frusciante, bringing in and Chad Smith bringing in that muscle and that fire, and and cranking things up and cranking up the speed and the tempos and just getting more sophisticated and getting wilder. And obviously the chemistry between Flea and Frusciante was just on fire from day one.
Yeah,
and it obviously only grew from there. Obviously, they grew by leaps and bounds when they got into Blood Sugar Sex Magic, and then from there, they kept growing. And it's kind of hard to believe that the band that was singing "I Want to Party on Your Pussy Baby" is the same band that generated such mature and soulful work on Californication and Stadium Arcadium, more than a decade later. It really is kind of, exploring this early part of the Red Hot Chili Peppers catalog is a really worthwhile exercise to see where the band started and where it became, and obviously, and then you can tell the whole story where starting in the mid-aughts where they started to lose their way. And they became way less consistent and a little bit more sappy, and a little bit more samey and a little bit more monotonous and more boring.
Definitely more boring.
Yeah, definitely more boring. By the mid-aughts, I mean, Stadium Arcadium is a mixed record. I've come to appreciate that record over the years and what they were going for. Not all the songs work, but there is some genuinely magnificent stuff on Stadium Arcadium. And so, but going back here and to these three albums, Freaky Styley, Uplift Mofo, and Mother's Milk, hell of an exercise. And yeah, Higher Ground, that's one of the best covers of any Motown song by a white rock band ever. Ever.
Yeah. Yep. All right, now we go to a band where everything they did worked. Well, at least during this early period. Jane's Addiction. Now we get to the part of this episode where we talk about the band that, in my opinion, were the best, most original, and most influential of the entire Los Angeles scene in the 1980s. In fact, I would argue Jane's Addiction were one of the 10 best, most original, and influential American bands of the 1980s, period.
Yeah, hard to argue with that.
Even more so than the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Jane's Addiction defined and epitomized LA's underground alternative rock scene. They did so not just musically, aesthetically with their sense of fashion, and culturally with what they meant to disillusioned youth. They were the defiant alternative to the shallow, sleazy, cheesy, sexist, homophobic, uber macho, glam hair metal scene and subgenre that had taken over the rock mainstream. Their music was an intoxicating, never before heard blend of punk, metal, psychedelia, progressive rock, and post punk goth that was powerful, alluring, and mysterious all at once. Thanks to shamanistic frontman Perry Farrell, the band had a tantalizing and charismatic stage presence. They had a passionate, hardcore cult following before their first studio album even came out. And unlike the hair metal flunky kids on the Sunset Strip, Jane's Addiction fans tended to be literate, well-read, and open-minded. The band's original incarnation ended soon after they broke through to the mainstream in the early 1990s, but their impact was immense as legions of American bands that flew the flag for anti-conformist counterculture alternative rock in the 1990s and beyond owe a debt in both their sound and attitude to what Jane's Addiction helped establish. Any history about this great band begins with Perry Farrell, born a nice Jewish boy from Queens, New York, called Peretz Bernstein. In the early 1980s, he moved to Los Angeles with a keen interest in the arts and a modest interest in being a fashion model. He fell in with the city's subterranean art scene and emerged as the lead singer of a post-punk band called Psycom, PSI-com. For a band that had little to no success, they lasted for a few years and managed to put out an EP right before their breakup in 1985. It was around this time that Bernstein, now going by the name Perry Farrell, Peripheral, get it? Befriended bassist Eric Avery, and the two bonded over their love of the Velvet Underground and Joy Division. The two decided to form a band and named themselves Jane's Addiction after Farrell's roommate, a woman named Jane Painter, who was a heroin addict. They had a drummer by the name of Matt Chaikin and a seemingly revolving cast of guitarists. After Chaikin failed to show up for rehearsals, he was let go, and Avery's younger sister, Rebecca, recommended her boyfriend, Stephen Perkins, as a replacement drummer. Blown away by Perkins' ability, Farrell and Avery hired him immediately. Perkins then recommended his buddy Dave Navarro as a guitarist, and after an audition, he was brought in as well. The classic lineup of Jane's Addiction was set. From late 1985 through 86, the band was an immediate smash in LA's underground music scene, being one of the main bands constantly performing at the legendary club Scream, which catered to industrial rock, punk, and any other kind of out there music. Such was the buzz about the band that a variety of major record labels showed interest in signing them. Eventually, they settled on Warner Brothers, with their manager negotiating what was at the time the largest advance ever given to a band or artist, which was reportedly between $250,000 to $300,000. However, being sensitive about their street credibility, the band was insistent that their first album be released on an independent label. Warner Brothers obliged and arranged for Jane's Addiction's first album to be a live album released on LA-based indie label Triple X Records. But before we get into the original lineup's brief discography, what is Mr. O'Connor's take on Jane's Addiction's origin story?
Mr. O'Connor's take on it is it's one of the more fascinating origin stories in all of rock and roll, just given all of the disparate people and all of the disparate forces involved. I mean, you have the early crawl of heroin that kind of helps define what they were doing. There's their part in the art scene and their interaction with sort of the punk and goth and post-punk scenes that were there. There's the interaction with Scream. There's the involvement. There's the fact that the drummer they hired just happened to have a buddy, and the buddy was Dave Navarro, who's one of the more fascinating guitarists and pretty boy scene guys. He was like he's so LA. He was LA as fuck.
Yeah.
And they kind of lucked in to him. And so having Perry Farrell and Dave Navarro as sort of yeah, as sort of yin and yang
Yeah.
in a band, it was just awesome. And and Farrell, like you said, he was shamanistic, but he also was an individual. He had this leadership skill of like making people
Yeah.
want to follow him and kind of
Right.
marching to his own drummer. He wanted to do things his way. Esquire ran an interview piece with Farrell last year when they were promoting the tour, which as folks might know, fell apart spectacularly when Farrell took a swing at Dave Navarro at his show in Boston in last September. But anyway, he talks about part of the origin story, and he says, "quote I learned that if you wanted to really have fun and get really really radical, you couldn't go to the clubs. At that time, there was something called pay to play. Pay to play was this really grotesque deal where a lot of kids in the valley that were still living with their parents had to come up with, I think, $500 to get booked, buy the tickets up front. When people give me credit for being the godfather of alternative, it was because I didn't have $500. End quote.
Yeah, that's a really good quote, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's the thing. He didn't have he was too poor to play the game, so he had to kind of make his own hay.
I had to
And
be alternative.
and so it's just so wonderfully organic
Yeah.
of an origin story and how they came together and all the disparate styles that they represented
Right.
and came up with. So a lot of that, what you just described, just fascinates me. And
Yeah.
I'll get into it a little bit later, but I also read a 2003 oral history of Jane's Addiction that Spin ran, and it was back in
Mm.
2003. And so I'll quote from that a little bit later. But I definitely recommend that people go find, if you do a search for Jane's Addiction 2003 Jane's Addiction or Spin,
Yeah.
Jane's Addiction
Yeah.
2003 Spin, it'll come up. And it's
Yeah.
a fascinating oral history, talks to all the people involved, including Casey Nicolay, who we haven't talked about yet, but that she was Perry Farrell's girlfriend who had
Right.
a lot of artistic influence as far as the look and the feel of the
Mm.
band
Mm.
up front initially.
Right.
So,
All right. The first album, live album, self-titled, Jane's Addiction, 1987. Recorded live on January 26th, 1987, on that one night at a 500 capacity club on the Sunset Strip called the Roxy Theater. Jane's Addiction's self-titled debut finds a band with a fully formed sound and possessing a fire and energy that burns through the speakers. Their punk, metal, psychedelia, prog, goth fusion sounds almost as revelatory now as it did back then. Classic rockers such as Whores, Pigs in Zen, and 1% relish in the us freaks against the establishment sentiment that the band was all about. The second half is mostly acoustic, with inspired covers of the Velvet Underground's rock and roll and the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil, as well as a rendition of one of the band's most famous songs, the heart-wrenching ballad Jane Says. The sound is raw as hell, as you would expect from a live album, but you can already hear what made this band so special. All they needed was a proper recording studio to get the brilliance out. Chris?
yeah, this really tremendous. Like you said, just General, the version that Jane Says here is marvelous. The version of Rock and Roll is marvelous. And Pigs and Zen actually like rocks balls too, and that this was indicative. This was kind of capturing a moment in time, the
Yeah.
scene that they had built in,
Yeah.
when they did Scream. The word got out, and so like I think Anthony Kiedis was in the audience, and
Yeah.
a whole bunch of other like label people were in the audience, and a whole bunch of other folks from bands in that scene were in that audience. So it's kind of it was like one of those like stories you tell your grandkids. I was at the recording of Jane's Addiction's live album from Scream in 1987.
Well, that's Roxy Theater, not Scream.
It was at Roxy.
It was at the Roxy Theater. Yeah.
Okay, I thought for some reason I thought it was at Scream, but okay,
Nope.
so it was at the Roxy, but everybody who was anybody was in the audience.
Yeah. I mean, the word got out that they were recording a live album. So that's why
Yep.
it was a big thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of like one of those where were you? And I was there, and I get to tell my grandkids and great grandkids. It's like you tell war stories of your
Yeah.
time in the '80s LA scene, and
Yeah.
this was indicative of it.
Right. Next, The classic, nothing, well, two classics, the first of two, Nothing's Shocking from 1988. When this album emerged in the summer of 1988, there was nothing like it in the rock landscape at the time. Critical acclaim was rapturous, with some writers even going on to claim that Jane's Addiction were the true heirs to Led Zeppelin. College radio stations throughout the country picked up on it. The long tour for the record saw them open for both Iggy Pop and the Ramones, expanding their already growing fan base. And by the end of the tour, they were already headlining clubs and small theaters on their own. The record peaked at number 103 on the Billboard album chart. Quite a feat for a brand new band that, at the time, weren't getting any airplay on commercial rock radio. However, the album almost didn't happen at all. During the recording of the album, in one of the biggest dick moves anyone has ever done to their bandmates in rock history, Perry Farrell shocked the others by stating he wanted 50% of all the band's publishing royalties for writing all the lyrics, which, to be fair, he did. In addition, he demanded a quarter of the remaining half of the publishing royalties for writing music, bringing his personal total to 62.5%. Obviously, the other three members were furious, and Jane's Addiction almost ended right there. Warner Brothers stepped in and called an emergency meeting, and Farrell eventually got what he wanted. As you can imagine, this sowed the seeds for the band's eventual breakup a few years later. Bassist Eric Avery would later say his relationship with Farrell was permanently severed after the publishing dispute. All that aside, Nothing's Shocking really is one of the greatest rock albums of all time, one of the best overall albums of the 1980s, and a shoo-in, at least for me, on the list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. Up the Beach, segueing into Ocean Size, opens the album with a majestic splendor that gives credence to all the Led Zeppelin comparisons. But Zeppelin if they were fused with Joy Division. The twists and turns of the very prog rockish Ted Just Admit It is Farrell's meditation on America's obsession with violence, hence the reference to Ted Bundy in the title. Had a Dad and Standing in the Shower Thinking rock with an inventiveness and innovation in Dave Navarro's guitar playing that makes you realize you're listening to the birth of heavy alternative rock as we know it. And of course, there's the full studio production version of the ballad Jane Says, Farrell's tender showing of empathy for a heroin-addicted woman desperately trying to escape her life while making sense of it. It's truly one of the most awe-inspiring, the album as a whole, one of the most awe-inspiring singular statements in rock history. Chris?
Yeah, marvelous album, belongs in the top 100 of all time. I would put it way high. And just the fact that Ted Just Admit It and Standing in the Shower Thinking are from the same band on the same album, and they follow each other in the sequencing, and it works.
Yeah,
it says a lot. And then other songs, "Idiots Rule," where where the Fishbone guys show up and Flea playing trumpet, and just some of the other stuff on there. Ocean Size is fantastic. And I will say this: about a decade ago, you and I were hanging out, and we green tested this album together.
Yes,
and it passed with flying colors.
Oh shit!
I have rarely had that kind of spiritual experience listening to rock and roll in my life than I did listening to this. And so it's an album that kind of defies description. You can't really call it post-punk. You can't really call it grunge. I guess you could call it heavy alternative, which in a way they invented that.
Yeah.
This is kind of the starting point of this. It's not really heavy metal. It's not really punk. What is it? It's just Nothing Shocking, and there's nothing else like it. And it's just a towering monument to that era. And probably, beyond the only album. I mean, I still think Appetite for Destruction's better. For what it's worth, but this comes damn close as the best album of the 80s.
Next, Ritual de lo Habitual from 1990. Warner Brothers had high expectations for Jane's Addiction's second studio album, and the album didn't disappoint. The record went as high as number 19 on the Billboard album chart, thanks to the massive success of the single Been Caught Stealing, a funk rock shuffle so insanely catchy that it remained at number 1 on Billboard's modern rock chart for 4 weeks. Elsewhere on the album, you have thundering jams, such as the jittery stop-start dynamic hopping of, well, Stop and Ain't No Right, the latter with one of the greatest opening bass lines in rock history, and a
Hmm.
song that hits warp speed like the Red Hot Chili Peppers on amphetamines. The second half of the record, however, is where Jane's Addiction's prog rock tendencies really come to the fore, especially with the 10-minute, multi-sectioned 3 Days, Perry Farrell's chronicle of his three-way tryst with his girlfriend and girlfriend's girlfriend. As far as dramatic buildup and its masterful use of space and intricately layered guitars, it's one of the greatest recorded moments in all of 1990s rock. By the time you reach by the time you reach the end with the beautiful, lushly melodic classic girl, you feel you're in the spiritual presence of one of the greatest bands in the world. And that's exactly what Jane's Addiction were as the 1990s started. Don't believe me? Here's a quote from Alice Cooper in 1994. Quote, I can spot traces of other people on this album, us included, but that's all they are. Traces. They really were an original band. This is their peak album where they really went out on a limb. Sometimes I get so caught up in these songs, I can actually feel the band pushing themselves to their limits. Sometimes I can't believe how strong it is. I wonder if this will have the same effect on some kid as Chuck Berry had on me. Chris?
Yeah, this album is I don't like it as quite as much as Nothing Shocking. I think there's some great songs on it. I think Stop is awesome. Obviously, Been Caught Stealing, which was done as a lark and ended up
Yeah.
becoming the single,
Yeah.
is really great. 3 Days is fucking awesome. Classic Girl is actually a
Yeah.
really great song as well. But it's not as consistent as Nothing Shocking, and I think some of the curveballs in the second half are a little too curveball-y. And I think part of it, the communication breakdown that was happening with the band after the royalties thing, and you also have to remember too, according to this 2003 Spin
Yeah.
oral history, which I'm going to quote from to end the episode here in a little bit. Evidently, Avery and Casey Nicholaw got sloppy drunk one night and were kissing. And
Mm.
apparently, Eric Avery expressed his undying love for Casey Nicholaw,
Oh,
and that got back to Perry Farrell. So that was kind of the end of it too. So between
yeah.
but and so when the two founders of your band aren't talking to each other, that's
Yeah.
a real problem. And when everybody else is like whacked out, I mean, there was like a several month delay in the making of this album, so that
Yeah.
one or two or many of the members of the band could go to rehab.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of noise, and I think that shows up in this. It's not quite there. Like I said, the highs are definitely highs, but the curveballs are a little too curveball-y for my tastes, and so I can't quite put it on the same par as it's definitely not elevated above Nothing Shocking, and it's not quite on a par with it either. Now that said, I wanted to end our discussion here by sharing a few quotes from the Spin oral history, and just sort of talking about this band's legacy and about some of the color to sort of bring this all of this home. First off, there's Navarro and Avery talking about Perry Farrell and about the band itself. So Dave Navarro says there wasn't a unified thread between us. Perry had a whole freakish look of his own, like some skinny, bugged-out goth surfer in horror makeup with flailing dreadlocks. Eric was more traditional punk rock, and Steven had this crazy afro hair thing. I was kind of a hippie kid, a little 60s influenced deadhead gone heavy metal. But you throw us together, and it was like a patchwork quilt. It doesn't look like it makes sense, but it keeps you warm. And Avery responds, people used to comment, you guys are such a hodgepodge of style. You look like you're in four different bands. And obviously they sounded like they were in four different bands. And
Yeah.
then you've got the booker from Scream, a guy named Dale Gloria, talking about the relationship, and several others talking about the relationship between Jane's Addiction and Guns N' Roses. And so Dale Gloria of Scream says, Guns were playing to the whole Whiskey Gazzari strip thing. We represented the anti-strip at Scream because of the darkness and a lot of the things we were doing. We were also 7 or 8 miles away from the strip in downtown LA, where only the more adventurous rocker types would go. The cat house where Tamed Down and Guns hung out was more of a sleazoid, tattoo, strippers, and rock and roll kind of thing. All the cat house guys looked like Bret Michaels from Poison, and the chicks were slutty Tawny Katane types. At Scream, all the guys looked like Ian McCulloch from Echo and the Bunnymen, and the girls were all Susie Sue clones.
Yeah.
And then Slash gets in here and Slash says, we rehearsed in the same little hole in the wall practice studio as Jane's. One day the Jane's guys were coming out as we were coming in, and it was very weird. We never exchanged words. It was sort of like one of those high school things where two sides quietly face off. And a band associate, a guy named Charlie Brown, says, Jane's hated Guns N' Roses. Guns were their mortal enemies as far as some scenesters and stuff. To which Slash says, Guns hated everybody. and then finally a money quote from this. They talked to Chris Cornell, and Chris Cornell says, I think a lot of people out there in Seattle think that rock and roll changed in the early 90s when Nirvana showed up and everyone had a big hit, but it didn't really work that way. There were bands like Jane's Addiction that laid the groundwork. Musically, Jane's had a huge impact on Soundgarden.
It's true. I can hear it. Yeah.
Yep. And so,
maybe not so much Bad Motorfinger, but like the late 80s Soundgarden. The stuff, that stuff.
Yeah, totally. Totally, for sure. So that's what I wanted to offer from those things, just kind of contextualize Jane's Addiction. They were a wholly unique band in a wholly unique time in history there in LA in the late 80s.
All right, Chris, we've come to the end. LA is finished.
Yes, they are. We have finished LA. We have gotten through the 1980s in LA. It was a glorious time for both the metalheads and the non-metalheads, where somehow Black Flag and X could coexist with Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses and Jane's Addiction. It was just a real hodgepodge of styles and a real melting pot, and it really defined the American rock and roll story more than any other scene in the 80s.
Yeah,
I would say. Really, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're talking a lot about LA, and it's inspiring me to think about a city several hundred miles up north nearing Canada. Maybe we can do something about that city, huh, Chris?
Perhaps, perhaps. Maybe we can do something along those lines. And with that said, folks, as we usually do at the end of these episodes, we encourage you to join our fabulous Facebook Curmudgeonly community, where Arturo has been keeping us in really great stuff up there, and we've been getting lots of good interactions with some of our power users, as I'll call them, guys like Jeff Baker. Hello, Jeff. Keep on trucking up there and come and join in the mirth and merriment. You can join us at facebook.com/group/curmudgeonrock. Got anything to say? Are you pissed at us for trashing hair metal, or at least Arturo trashing hair metal? Then talk shit back and send us fan mail or hate mail at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And as Arturo alluded to early in the episode, we'll have a Spotify playlist that'll include a lot of that hair metal and a lot of that glam metal that we covered, along with lots of Red Hot Chili Peppers and Jane's Addiction. And so you'll be able to access the link to that playlist in the episode description, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple or Stitcher or Amazon or wherever. So look out for that, and hey, dig it.